Hello everyone, Rob here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to configure an FTP over SSL server on Windows Server 2019 using basically IIS. To cover a couple things real quick first, on the Osborne Pro GitHub repo called config templates, I have two scripts here that you're welcome to use. The first one is used to create users in Active Directory and assign an FTP Home directory to the user. It also determines whether they should be added to the FTP-Admins group or the FTP-Users group. The second script here is one I'm going to really cover, and that's the one that sets up an FTP over SSL server. I'll have a link to this in the description so you can get there easily. First, looking at Active Directory. To show you, I have a couple users here, Robert H. Osborne, and he is a member of the FTP-Admins group. So here is FTP-Admins, members, and you can see I'm a member. There's also the FTP-Users group, which has members of these three users. These three users are only going to have download permissions. They're not going to have upload permissions, where the admin's going to be able to do both. Another thing I'm going to point out here is actually I had that set up. It's from an old one. Okay, so there's a couple things to mention. This is the UserList.csv file. This is associated with that first script I mentioned that creates Active Directory users and groups for FTP users. It uses the SAM account name and then assigns the following two values to their attributes. So if I go to attribute editor and then ms, IIS, FTP, dir, and root, these are the values that get assigned. The admin at the end determines that R. Osborne gets added to the FTP-Admins group. The user at the end determines that, for example, Legion gets added to the FTP-Users group member, and you can see he's in here, David Holler. Now, notice that these are network shares, and this is a local share. The network share is assuming that the users that have these attributes assigned have a home directory, so just pretend that this network share is not on the FTP server and that the C-inet pub FTP root is on the FTP server. My test environment's just somewhat small, as we only have 3 machines, so that is why I have that set that way. Now that we see these are the attributes set, that's how that CSV file works. We have our users. Also, just to mention, these are assigning different directories to each user. You can also use this local FTP root directory to assign different users to the script. So this could also be like Adam, for example. And then that way multiple users have access to the same directory for performing download actions. So that is that situation there. On to our install script. Notice here we don't have any FTP Site set up yet. There's no FTP Firewall rules set, and our script is going to create that for us. Also, there's no FTC inet pub FTP root directory created either. This script is going to do all that for us. It's also going to install the FTP instance for us automatically as well, which you can see with these two commands here, install Windows feature. So I'm going to run this script and walk you through it. The first thing it asks is it wants you to make sure you're a member of a domain. This is because I use this environment variable to get the domain name later on in the script. It is also, we need to be a member of the domain admins group so we can install the FTP service, modify permissions, and things of that nature. Once both those requirements are met, you can hit enter. If they're not, you can do Control-C to cancel and then get those requirements met. I hit enter. We can see it would have installed the FTP server if it was not already. Imported commands we need. Now it's asking what is the name of the Active Directory group you created for FTP users. So for me it's FTP-Users. And if you forget, you can always just double check in Active Directory. And next is FTP-Admins is going to be asked next, just to remind you that exists as well. So FTP-Users, I can give them either only read, only write, or both read and write permissions. Read is of course download permissions, write is of course upload permissions, and read and write is both of those. We're just going to be doing read for allowing downloads. Our Active Directory group is called FTP-Admins, and we want them to have read and write permissions, so read comma write. This is the name that will appear in IIS Manager, so Osborne Pro FTPS, and you'll see that shortly, just remember that name. And then we have the home directory for the FTP site, which will be C inetpub FTP Root. And this is a typical naming convention. If you're familiar with web servers, you know www root. So that is the FTP root. Now, the port, we can use port 21. It does matter for SSL which port you select, as port 21 is Explicit SSL, where port 990 is Implicit SSL. Now the difference between them, with port 21 using Explicit, the client initiates the communication, the server responds, and then they build a TLS tunnel. Then inside that tunnel, the login can happen, or the data communication can happen where files are transferred, or both can be enabled for SSL, which this script does. So you can choose to only encrypt login or data transfer, one or the other, or you can choose to do both. This script does both. If you were to use port 990, this would be Implicit SSL. This would also work with this script, but port 990, there's no client-initiated communication. The server initiates it. So the TLS tunnel is built, login happens, then data transfer. So there's a little bit less communication. More legacy clients may only work with port 990 if you're using FTPS. Newer devices use Explicit because it's a newer protocol. So we're going to pick port 21. Port 21, use Explicit SSL. This creates the firewall rule for port 21. So if I go to my firewall rule and refresh inbound, we can see allow FTP communication has been created, and it allows traffic on port 21. The next thing we're doing here is it creates the inetpub FTP root directory. So now we can see here this folder exists, and it also creates our IIS site. So if I go to IIS Manager, refresh my sites, I have my new Osborne Pro FTPS site here, and that was the name I gave it earlier. So next is, what should the local FTP users group be? Since Active Directory, I made it FTP-Users. My local group is just going to be FTP-Users. That's how I interpret it. Excuse me. Now, would you like to create a local FTP user to access the server? I'm going to say no. You can do that if you like. However, in order for that to work, the FTP user is going to most likely need login permissions on the server, which I believe is disabled by default now in Server 2019, so I'm going to say no there. Actually, I'm going to say yes. We'll create that. What the hey, right? So we'll say this user will be FTP user without the dash to fit the naming convention I have. Set the password, and all right. So now what's going on is the authorization rules are being added to the site. So if I were to go into IIS Manager, Osborne Pro FTPS, then FTP Authorization Rules, these are the rules that were just added. And you can see admins have read, write, or upload, download, and users have download. The other thing set here was basic authentication. So back in IIS Manager, if I go to FTP Authentication, anonymous is disabled, basic authentication enabled. And that basically means Windows credentials and Active Directory credentials can be used to access the server or the service. We also set permissions on the CINETPUB FTP Root directory, adding system, the local administrators group, and the local FTP users group. So if I right click on this CINETPUB FTP Root file, go to Properties, Security, Advanced, because I need to enter admin credentials, we can see the local FTP users group is a member, as is the administrators group, as is system. Alright, so those are those permissions. Next thing we're doing is entering credentials that are going to be used to query Active Directory in order to pull the attribute values we need, which are the IIS FTP dir and IIS FTP Root, because we need to obtain these values from Active Directory in order to know the home directory of each user signing in. So I need a domain admin here. I'm entering, if you have you should create an account with a very strong password that does not expire. In case you ever change a password, you don't want the service to break where you have to go in and remember to enter the credentials again. And now I enter that user's credentials and make sure I did that right. I feel like that was wrong for some reason. Alright, my gut's feeling better about that one. And what that did there was, if I go back to IIS Manager, select my FTP Site, FTP User Isolation, this is where those credentials were entered for the FTP Home dir and Active Directory. Our next task here is assigning the SSL certificate. I give you a couple choices on your computer here by showing you their thumbprint, so you can simply copy and paste one of these if you'd like. But we are not going to use that one. This is a thumbprint here that's going to be used. And that was obtained by searching for a certificate in the local machine store that contains FTP in the FriendlyName. If you'd like to assign a FriendlyName to one of your certs, simply use cert-lm here to open the local machine certificate manager, double click on a certificate, go to the Details tab, click Edit Properties, and then you can edit a FriendlyName here by putting FTP. FTP could be anywhere in there. As long as it's there, it will get pulled out and noticed. So that will work to retrieve that certificate. So as such, I'm going to leave this blank, which will select that certificate thumbprint for me. And then would I like to define passive ports? I'm going to say yes. These are ports, a good range for this is anywhere from port 40,000 to 50,000. So I'm going to do a starting port of 40,000 and an end port of 41,000. And that is configuring my port values. So now if I go to IIS Manager, select Osborne Pro FTPS, then Firewall Support, we can see the ports were defined there. And also I have an IP address value defined as well. If I go up here to CA, which is basically the host name, this instance right under Start Page, I go to FTP Firewall Support here, and that will allow me to change the data channel port range. As you can see down here, when selected, it's grayed out. It has to be modified from this value here. So that covers that part of it. The next thing, what is the IP address you would like to set for passive connections? This was set automatically, as you saw, so I'm going to hit enter to leave it blank. You can define a different IP address if you prefer, by simply just typing in whatever you want to use. And as you can see, I have mine here, but I'm leaving it blank. Would you like to, also I should say, I left that blank, and what happened was it obtained that IP address from a DHCP reservation. So that's, if you do not have a DHCP reservation assigned, I would suggest putting the IP address in manually. That is my situation, so I left it blank. Would you like to add a virtual host name for your FTP site? I'm going to say no. What that is an IIS Manager. Select your site, then go to Bindings, and double click your option here. This would be the virtual host name is what I'm referring to there. So if that were set, that's great. It would also tell you, it would modify your host file. So if I were to open C Windows System32 drivers etc hosts, this is how that value would get added. We have the IP address obtained from the DHCP server, or whatever you define. Then this is the virtual host name you define, and then these values are determined automatically using the environment variables env computer name, and then that would be .env user DNS domain. So that's how those values were obtained here. The next thing, I'm going to say no because I don't want to set up the virtual host name. The ports were created, so in my inbound rules, if I refresh this, the passive ports I defined are now set on my application firewall here, ports 40,000 to 41,000. 128-bit encryption is enabled, which you'll see in just a second. The FTP site was restarted, and the FTP port is open, which we tested here, where we can see TCP test exceeded, remote port 21. And now back in IIS Manager, I select my FTP site, go to SSL Settings, and this is the FTP certificate that was selected. And in details at the bottom, you can see the friendly name has FTP in it, so that's how it was discovered automatically. SSL connections are required, and the use of 120-bit encryption is also selected. Now our FTP server is configured. If you want to do some more customization after that, you're welcome to add special FTP messages. So your banner is before the login. Welcome is what appears after your login. You can add an exit message or define a max amount of connections that if you prefer. So you could do maybe 3 or 10, you know, depending on how many people are in your environment that are going to be accessing the FTP server at the same time. Do you want to save? No. Okay. So the other thing you can do is define IP addresses. So if I go to my IIS Manager FTP site and then FTP IP address and domain restrictions, I can add allow entries or deny entries determining what IP addresses are allowed to access the FTP service. Those are going to depend on your environment, and feel free to modify those as you like. And just to cover one more time, user isolation we have set to being obtained from Active Directory. So now what I'm going to do is, before I sign in, I'm going to show you one more set of permissions. So on my network share here, which is FTPS, I go to Properties, Sharing, Advanced Sharing, Permissions. You can see administrators have full control, as does everyone. Those are important in order to access the share. Inside the share is Legion and Shadow King. So to show you what I'm referring to here. So if I sign in, currently I'm on a desktop that's going to access this FTP server. I'm open in FileZilla, and in order to connect, I need to do FTPES for Explicit SSL, and that is because I'm using port 21. If I was using port 990, it would have to be FTPS, like that. So back to the one I am using, FTPES port 21, and I'm signing into the FTP server, ftp.osbornepro.com, and I'm using rosborn. Here's my password. Now if I quick connect, I verify the certificate by clicking OK. And we can see the directory listing is successful. So now I should be able to upload files, which I can do by double-clicking OpenSSL here. And now I can see that was loaded over here. I'm going to remove that from the server real quick. And I can also download files. So I can download, delete this real quick. I can download Test Legion, and it's going to appear on my left screen over here. So we'll double-click that, and now it's here. So I have upload and download permissions with R. Osborne. If I were to modify R. Osborne's permissions or directory values here, like FTPS, cut that out and paste it here, now when I sign in, it should not work basically. So all the same information up here on port 21, quick connect, and you can see my home directory is inaccessible. So everything's a little bit finicky. You got to make sure you get it just right in order for this to work. So I'm going to set my values again so that it works for this user if he wants to sign in again. And it's a quick sign in, so I'm just going to click quick connect so you can see it works now again. And now directory listing is successful. If I sign in with someone with user permissions such as Legion and port 21, FTPES, quick connect, and user is not able to log in. So why is that? I might have typed the password wrong. And try again. There we go. I entered the password wrong. Okay, so now you can see Legion's home directory is David Holler, attributes. I go to my attributes, and you can see the network share FTPS Legion is the home directory, and that is this one here. And to show you my permissions on that file or that directory, administrators have full permissions, CA users have read and write permissions. On the FTPS directory here, if I check out the permissions, we saw only admins had full control. Or admins, sorry, and everyone have full control. And that is important for the users being able to sign in and access these folders in order to download and upload. So now we're going back to the desktop. If I want to download Test Legion, I should be able to. And we can see that was successful. Now the file's over here, so I'm going to delete that. Now what if I try to upload? I get a connection aborted and the transfer failed. That's because uploads are not allowed. And just to show you, if I were to come over here and add local group member FTP-Users, and I'm going to add the member Legion. We'll do it this way. Legion at osbornepro.com. Get local group member of FTP-Users. Now that Legion is a member of the FTP-Users group, I may be doing this wrong. Sorry about that, guys. So that is fine. I have Legion a member of the FTP-Users group. The other thing I need to do in IIS Manager is select my FTP site, go to FTP Authorization Rules, and now the local FTP Users group I'm going to assign write permissions. And then I'm going to restart the FTP site by clicking the restart button over here while the FTP site is selected. Now when I come back over here, I'm going to connect again as Legion. We can see I have successfully connected. Now I'm going to try to upload a file again. And it looks like it was denied. So I missed one thing here. FTP Authorization Rules, read and write. Real quick, let me restart the FTP service just to make sure I'm telling everybody right. FTP. Alright, so that's restarted. Connect again as Legion. Connection established. Upload. And now I needed to restart the entire service. That's why that didn't work. So as you can see, even though Legion is a member of the Active Directory FTP-Users group, which has read permissions only on the IIS site, as you can see here, because he's a member of the local group with read and write permissions, those weaker permissions are not applied. He has the read and write as opposed to just read. That's just something to keep in mind. At least the principle of having least, what do they call that? Permissions that are restrictive. The more restrictive permissions are not applied. Alright, so back to our desktop. Now that we see all that with Legion, if I were to sign in with FTP User or FTPS User and set that guy's password on port 21, abort the connection, and we were able to successfully log in. This is a blank one here, so what I'm going to do first is try to upload a file. So because I assigned the local group here in my authorization rules with read-write permissions, this is being assigned to the FTP directory, which can be seen by going to right-clicking on your FTP site, Manage FTP Site, Advanced Settings. This is the home directory for that folder. So that is also the home directory for FTPS User here. If I go to my attribute editor, it is C inetpub FTP Root, as you can see here. So when he signs in and uploads files, that goes to C, oh, wrong. So here I go to C inetpub FTP Root, and I need admin permission to access. We can see he uploaded the file there. Now I'm going to delete it. Now those were download permissions. I want to make sure, those were upload permissions. So if I were to sign in with the Shadow King and set that password and connect, we can see I'm going to be able to download but not upload because he's only a member of the Active Directory FTP Users group. So if I double click this, I download the file successfully, and if I double click Open SSL, oh, I uploaded. Why did I upload? Oh, well, let's see. If I get that's why. Sorry about that, people. That worked because the local FTP Users group has the Active Directory group added to it. So I need to remove that by doing remove local group member from the group FTP Users, and I'm going to remove Osborne. Well, I'm going to just copy and paste. So I'm going to need to remove this group. I forgot I had added that, so we remove that. Now if I check my group membership, I can see the local or the Active Directory FTP Users group is no longer a member of the local FTP Users group. So if I go back to my FTP client, sign in again, now I'll be able to download Test Shadow King, but I won't be able to upload Ninite FileZilla here. And as you can see, the file transfer failed. And again, that was demonstrating the restrictive permissions in IIS. So even though the read-write permissions got applied, despite the FTP-Users AD group only having read permissions. So that was everything I wanted to cover. Feel free to leave comments and let me know what you think. Thanks for watching.